Hello and welcome to Mas Naigan Isqueo. I'm Kayla Lar-Son and I'm here with
Tanya Ball,
Sheila Laroque.
And we're going to be talking about Indigenous Publishing today.
Now what, hey?
Well, I guess what we wanted to accomplish with this first intro episode is to introduce ourselves. So, who are you?
Who am I? I guess we should talk about, we should have thought about this before.
Are you just going to get philosophical with who you are?
Who am I? Yes.
Who am I?
I'm always philosophical. So I guess I can start. My name is Tanya. Hi, everybody. I identify as a Métis woman. My family is from St. Ambrose, Manitoba, which is just at the base of Lake Manitoba, a small village there. Currently, I'm a student at the Faculty of Native Studies doing my PhD on Métis ghost stories, which I think is very cool. Yeah, I guess that's it. I've been a librarian for a long time, but not anymore. I'm out. But that's it. I don't know.
Okay, cool. So, hi, everyone in podcast land. My name is Sheila Laroque. I identify as Métis. My family comes from near Duck Lake, Saskatchewan. That's my father's side where my Métis lineage comes from. My mom is originally from outside of London, Ontario. I am currently a librarian. I've been a librarian working in libraries since 2013. I've lived all over what we call Canada. And yeah, interested in books and how they get into our hot little hands and all things publishing, which goes beyond books. And yeah, that's me.
Cool. So I'm Kayla Lar-Son. I identify as a Métis woman. My family is kind of from all over the place as well. We're definitely Métis wanderers, but mostly located in Manitoba and Alberta. Currently, I'm employed as a librarian with the University of Alberta. I work in digital initiatives. It's okay. I'm also an embedded librarian with the transition year program, which is first year Indigenous students on campus. I'm also a sessional instructor for the School of Library and Information Studies at the University of Alberta, and I'm teaching Indigenous LIS in a Canadian context with Tanya as well.
Okay, so I guess let's talk about
what brought us here today.
Yeah.
We're in my house.
Yes!
So, I guess technically I moved in here in July. Yeah, that's what brought me here today. But what I guess
you just walked downstairs.
Yeah,
like, I'm here.
Downstairs, got dressed. But I guess what brought me to this project, when Tanya was first talking about it, I thought that was amazing. I've always wanted to get into podcasting, big fan of the medium, and starting conversations about publishing is really important because I think we've had a lot of dominant, scare quotes, Indigenous voices in publishing that have taken up a lot of space. We need to talk to some other people.
Yeah, so what brought me here today was, I drove on over to the south side from the north side. North side represent. But what brought me here was, I don't know, I kind of have a weird relationship with publishing. I like to think depending on the day, my idea of how I feel about publishing changes, or how many coffees I've had sometimes, and just get that espresso into you and you start shaking and getting just right pissed off about things. Either I really like publishing and I think it's a great thing for Indigenous people to be part of, or depending on the day and what's going on, I think it's the most violent thing and I'm just not about it at all. So I think I don't know enough about publishing and publishing practices. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think I know enough about kind of the back end part of publishing, and possibly that's to do on how transparent publishers are with their individuals that they're working with, but I feel like I just don't have enough, and maybe that's what's driving my negative perception of publishing in some cases.
I guess I got here also from the north side, super far north side, so it was a bit of a trek, but I made it and I didn't get lost. Thank you, Google. I don't know, this morning I went to the Halloween store, which was pretty awesome.
I'm jealous.
I was terrified. Actually, it was kind of funny because they have this little makeshift haunted house, and I went in there and I screamed so loudly that I pummeled over my own children. And they're like, "What's going on?" And I'm just screaming. It was really awful, but Ooh, bad mom moment, I think. I have a lot of those. Outside of that, I mean, I'm really, really interested in editing. I guess it's more editing, publishing, and writing of Indigenous stories. I'm really into storytelling as a medium and as a cultural, it's a really huge cultural thing. Well, I don't want to say a lot of experience. I've had a little tiny bit of experiencing within the publishing world. I used to work as an intern through the U of A Indigenous internship, working at the publishing house, and I was there for about 2 years, but I didn't get to get too into, I guess, what everything that's going on. I'm really into sensitivity reading because I really think that people miss a lot of subtle cultural things, including the U of A. Other than that, I don't know. I guess that's my experience. I've worked a little bit with sensitivity reading, and Kayla has been smacking me for that.
No, it's fine. You're published, like... sensitivity reading is totally fine, but there's not just like one way of doing things. That's my thing. I'm always like, I'm a little like shit disturber. Constructive shit disturbing is totally fine, and I'm a true believer that there's not always just like one way of doing things, and there isn't always just like one person that has to be right just because I'm gonna write the next book about Indigenous publishing practices. There we go. So there's not just one about editing style.
Cool, I'd buy it, sure.
Well, good. One person would buy it.
Yes, I would. Yes, I would. Well, that's the thing, right? And I think you're onto something, is that I hate that stereotype that there's just one Indigenous peoples, right? It feeds into that pan-Indian stereotype that if I'm Indigenous and I'm doing a sensitivity reading, that absolutely every single Indigenous person is going to agree with what I say.
Yeah.
Because that's absolutely not true. We all have different perspectives based on, I guess, where it is that we're coming from and how connected to community you are and which community you're talking about. Because there's lots of communities that I know nothing about.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Which is why these types of things, it needs to be a conversation. Mm-hmm. Which is why it's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that we're here today, I guess.
All right, so what was everyone's first experience with publishing like?
You go first.
Oh, okay. Just put right on the spot. So I have one kind of academic paper that's been published in a journal, and it was a big collaboration of individuals. I felt like I didn't do a lot, mostly because I was kind of like the junior on the project and had never published before, so I'm pretty sure that I'm like listed last out of everybody. If not, somebody else in this room might actually be listed last on the paper.
Who's listed last in the paper?
I think Sheila's actually last. Yeah. But it was one of those things, like, everybody had been publishing or had, like, academic publishing so much under their belts that it was just kind of like, I did a little bit for it, but didn't do much. And I was very new to also the idea of decolonizing metadata and descriptive practices. And I was in my, like, first year of university when this started as an MLIS student. So I knew, like, nothing about metadata, and I barely knew why I was being invited to be on this project. And so for me, mostly like what I actually talked about within the paper was just like general things about Indigenous people in Canada, and like wrote a very small section, and then everybody else did a lot more within the paper. So that was my first experience kind of having like an academic published paper. Yeah, I knew nothing. I shouldn't say didn't know anything. I knew a little bit about the journal that we were publishing in and the individuals who had asked us to actually publish. So I did know the people that were asking for the publication, but I knew very little about like everything else, like the contracts, signing, like, I think it's copyrights. Yeah, so signing, like, copyright agreements. Well, you don't get paid for it, so I didn't get a paycheck, which was kind of crappy as a student, but you can't put your hand out and ask for money for everything, I guess.
I feel like you can.
Maybe, you can. Yeah, and even talking about, like, open access, there was no, like, conversation with me about, like, if it's an open access journal, if it's, like, closed. And then I guess my other experience with...
Wait, before you move on, can we rewind for a few minutes?
Sure.
So you just mentioned that you were a student and you were brought into this room with a bunch of other librarians to talk about metadata, and you had no idea anything about metadata was.
Yeah.
Like let's unpack that a little bit. Like, why were you in that room?
I got asked to be part of the project to kind of do the first part of like community connections and getting kind of a feel about how like university students, faculty, staff that are Indigenous felt about like our metadata practices, and do a little bit of just like consultations without actually necessarily disseminating any type of like final work because we didn't have ethics to do that. But it was more like they wanted my opinion on what I thought was like appropriate metadata. So that's what I was brought in, more of like the community aspect of it. Definitely not like anything technical, especially because I didn't even know what metadata was, especially being so new to the profession. It was a little bit weird, but eventually, like, as I grew as a student and like a professional, it made like a little bit more sense to me why I was there. But then Sheila came in the second year of the project and took over. So I just did a little bit, like barely anything with the project after that because she had more experience and was getting paid to do it. So that was also nice.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of like, what's our academic freedom again? What are we allowed to say? Maybe we should have found that out before. Yeah. I don't know. To me, that sounds like tokenism.
Well, I mean, yeah. I have this weird thing about, like, tokenism, though, because, like, if I'm at the point where, like, there's so, and we shouldn't be like this, but there's, like, so few people that actually act in, like, a good way with, like, Indigenous communities that it's almost like it's this little, like, not a bodyguard, but it's just, like, you better invite me so that you don't mess up, because someone will probably mess up and do something that they shouldn't have, so it's almost like that mediator where you're like, okay, we just want to make sure that this is going good. And like, I was a Native Studies student, so I know like a lot of community members. So it was a good way of like interacting with people. And also they tend to be a little bit more like students, faculty, staff tend to be a little bit more candid when they know somebody and actually will tell you how they feel as compared to somebody like that they don't know at all. So that was kind of a good part about being on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No worries. I think my other like publishing story is like a little bit weirder than that.
Did you want to add anything onto that project before we move on?
Oh, well, I'll just say, like, I'm really grateful that you got thrown into that weird project because part of the recommendations was to hire someone, and that person ended up being me.
Yeah.
Which is really hilarious. I had a little bit of experience working with institutions who are starting to grapple with their metadata practices, or should I say, I was at CBC on an Indigenous languages project, and I was like, you guys, you really do need to think about how you're gonna be classifying this information about these communities. And maybe they did, maybe they didn't, I don't know. The project got moved to Yellowknife, so then when that happened, I was kind of looking around. Like, I don't have a lease. I'm not dating anyone. I already have the pills to like put my cat on a plane. Like, what am I doing in Toronto?
To drug your cat.
Yeah, like and then I ended up leaving the cat in Toronto, and I just started applying for like everything outside of inside the GTA, anything within Canada really. And Edmonton was what stuck, so I moved. Yeah. And then I worked on the Decolonizing Description project for about a year with you guys, and you did have a lot to do.
I don't know. I don't think I did anything for that project.
Yes, you did. But that's how we got to know each other, and that's how we got to come through on this project. And what's your other weird...
Oh, God. Okay. So my newest weird publishing story is... I guess my second ever publication that I've done was I was approached at a conference by an individual that I knew and asked to do a book chapter with them, which was totally fine. Like, it was a great way of kind of like trying a different form of publishing. It was just a bit weird. Like, I understood like what they wanted, and it was publishing for like film studies anthology. And so they wanted to publish about an Indigenous created movie. And so I found one, and we just kind of wrote a book chapter on tricksters and the use of like Indigenous like characters within it, and it had like a primarily Indigenous cast as well, an Indigenous director. So we talked about this short film, but like the weird part about it was I didn't know anything about like the publisher. I didn't know anything about the person that was contacting me about the deadlines and that kind of stuff. I gave them my address to get like an author copy, but I don't know when that's going to come. The only reason I pretty much agreed to do this was because I knew the person that asked me and trusted them. But if I didn't know the person that asked me and had known the people that they were publishing through, I would be like, no, like I would have put the brakes on it a long time before it got published. Because I have no clue. To this day, I still have no clue who the person was that was corresponding back and forth with me about this book chapter.
Do you know when it's actually coming out?
Psh, I don't know. I'm just like waiting for that author copy.
Is it actually getting published? Oh, I don't know.
Supposedly it is. Like, I've checked their, like, the website, and they do publish course material, like, not really course material, but, like, textbooks for university students. So it is a legit thing. But it was one of those things where, like, there's not a lot. Like, it was just very strange. I don't know. So I don't know if I'm just kind of like...
So you might be a published author?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe, someday?
Well, like, he did say that, like, the person I was corresponding back and forth with did say that, like, other people had submitted, and we were pretty much the last two, like, authors that they were waiting for a book chapter, because we were so late in actually getting our stuff in, because I was away and the other author was away at conferences. So we were like very late in getting our stuff together. Yeah, it was just, I don't know, it was a weird experience. But I think
sounds weird.
It is a weird but I feel like I'm not the only one that has like weird book chapter publishing experiences.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, you're not.
No, you're not. I think Sheila's gonna tell us a story.
I was approached by my friend, Julia King, when I finished my MI at the University of Toronto because she heard about like this chapter about language use. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I forget a lot about it, what it was. But I said, okay, yeah, like we can do this. I know the person, so we can work on this. And the chapter that we co-authored was about the ability and like place that oral collections and oral histories would have within special collections libraries, and like the importance of legitimizing this like very important like knowledge ways, and like how that could be housed within special collections within academic libraries or not. So it was hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of work. The publication fell through as a book, and then it was supposed to get rewritten as a special journal publication, and that also fell through. And then after we had written it and were thinking about it, we needed a line on our CV to show a bit about what we had done, and so we were able to present our work at the anti-racist day, or the Day for Elimination of Racism conference in Toronto, one of those conferences. Anyway, so, because we thought that was a better, like, avenue, we realized that as we were editing, we're like, this is a little bit weird to be writing about the importance of, like, oral storytelling and histories. Yeah, we were able to, like, at least, like, get something for that work, but would I do that again? Absolutely not. I was able to get something published with you. Mm-hmm. I am one of those co-authors. I feel like I came in at the last, because I was the recommendation that they hired. I like put a little stamp on it of what other TRCs had happened throughout the world, like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I feel like I need to like spell that out now, because I had someone ask me that.
They asked you what the TRC was?
Yes, in a webinar about the TRC.
What? Why were they even there?
Oh, God.
To learn, I guess.
Get out. Just get out.
And because I will then always have job security if I'm working in that field. I didn't realize how bad we were behind on that, but apparently we are real far behind. We live in an Indigenous bubble where everyone knows what the TRC is and has thoughts about it. But anyway, so I've tried to get, when I was still working at the university, I tried to get a solo article published. It was a rework of what I had done. I had written a paper about metadata and classification systems when I was in grad school. And one of the reviewers, I forget the exact title of the journal, so I'm not going to name them. I will probably look it up and tell you guys after the microphone is off. One of the reviewers said that it needed to be more Canadian.
What does that even mean?
I don't know. My Indigenous thing was not Canadian enough.
Like, you need to, like, scent your paper with, like, maple syrup or something?
I guess
like...
so. So I was, like, really busy at work, and honestly, I had some other stuff going on, and I really didn't like the way that there was no work-life balance with that job. So I said no, and I withdrew my paper for publication. I've actually just submitted, like, another, like, some article revisions that was left over from that job, like, last week's. It was just more, not so much a research paper, but just talking about the Making Meaning Symposium that you both helped an incredible amount on. We'll see if that ever gets published, but it was so weird, like, how long it takes for things to get published. Like, by the time that the paper that we co-authored was published, I already had another job. Cool. Like, people could see what I did at that job. It's just such a bizarre timeline. It really does, like, favor people who are in permanent positions,
right,
who can get paid to do writing work, or it puts a lot of pressure on people who are precariously employed. Oh, if I want to get, like, one of those, like, permanent things, then I have to publish, right, like, do all the things. But then when do you, like, take time to live?
You don't.
Your life.
Yeah. You just don't.
Yeah, exactly. My cousin wrote a book, like a novel, about, like, growing up in small town Saskatchewan and playing hockey. It was amazing to see that, and, like, it's totally... Actually, so when I had my first interview with Saskatoon Public Library, I completely did not prepare for what do you like to read question. I prepared for everything else, but I didn't think about that, and I was completely caught off guard. When they asked me what my favorite book was, I drew a blank, but then I said the most Métis thing I could have said, and I said my cousin's book. And I told them about my cousin's book, and, like, they had a reading at the library and everything was fine. So they were like, oh, okay. And then they hired me, like, thank God. But yeah, pro tip for baby librarians out there, at least know what you like to read. Have an answer prepared, even if you don't read anymore, because
I was gonna say, who has time to read?
You've been working in life. Yeah.
What is this thing reading?
Yeah, we have the Book Cod podcast, and none of us read.
I started reading again, but only because I just left academia.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I read comic books, and I read what my professors tell me to, and that's about it.
Good job.
Yeah. I feel like I've picked up a few, like, pleasure readings, but mostly the only time that I've been reading right now is when I'm on a plane to, like, go to a conference. I'm like, oh, I have to be on a plane, so I might as well read. But I rarely have time for actually, like, reading for pleasure.
That's what made me really, like, that's what I really missed about academia. I didn't feel like everything I was reading was super boring. And I didn't do my readings when I was in grad school, and I didn't do my readings when I was in undergrad.
Yeah.
So just, like, reading for pressure and reading for employment and, like, reading for hopefully being employed at the end of the fiscal year just wasn't fun. Yeah. And I never felt like I learned a lot from, like, that type of reading. I never felt like I was a good academic in, like, the years that I went to university and then was employed by universities. Yeah.
Imposter syndrome is real.
Yes, indeed.
It is a real thing.
Yeah. How about you, Tanya?
I'm trying to think of which experience to even talk about. Maybe I'll talk about my first publishing experience, because I actually did a co-author with my really good friend. Her name is Jamie Cataglu, who's also a librarian now, go figure. But we wrote a book review, and that was a weird experience, because when you're in master's degrees or whatever, undergrad, wherever you are, you're encouraged to criticize and critique different books, which is what we did. And I submitted it for publishing, and I think it's in an OJS journal, like one of those ones at the U of A through Digital Initiatives. And we sent it in, and I sent it to my supervisor, and my supervisor's like, wait, you sent this in for publication? Yeah, why? What's wrong with it? And she's like, you are way too critical. And that was, like, my first my first little insight into the bullshit of
Oh.
academia and scholarship, because you never, ever, ever, especially if you don't have like a tenured job or things like that, you never want to critique anyone.
Yeah.
Because you still need to make nice and
Oh.
have a job at the end of the day. So we actually had to pull the chapter, completely redo it, and send it in again, which was a nightmare.
Oh my god. Okay. Totally just stepping in. I once asked one of my academic dads if they've ever been in like the same room with somebody that they've given like a book review for.
Mhm.
And they were like, oh yeah, it happens all the time. And I'm like, is it awkward? And they were like, there's a reason that nobody likes me. And I was like, yeah. I was like, especially, I hate writing book reviews. I find it to be so awkward personally because a lot of people spend so much time, and either like your book is going to be great and I'm going to like it, or your book is going to be crap and I'm not going to buy it, or like I'm not going to read it and cite it because I don't agree with it. And that's the thing for book reviews with me. It's so like subjective and biased that I'm like, yeah, I just don't like doing them. So when professors ask me to do book reviews, I'm like, nah, not unless I have to. So
Yeah, I think that makes sense, really. Everything is so subjective. You shouldn't...
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I had an assignment in my undergraduate degree for a religious studies class I was taking, and the professor asked us to write a book review about her own book.
What? That's
no.
problematic.
Yikes.
Yikes.
Obviously, I loved it and thought it was great and couldn't really think of anything critical to say about it. Duh. And I got a pretty good mark. Duh. Like, just
Yeah.
really shady stuff.
I think that highlights a lot of the problems within academia, right?
Yeah.
Because you're handing in an assignment, and I don't think this is just academia, this is publishing in general. You're handing something in, and you're hoping to God at the other end of, I guess, the receiving end, that A, they understand your worldview, and B, they're empathetic to your story, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times there aren't. Like in libraries, there's under 30 Indigenous librarians? And if I'm sending in an article about Indigenous worldview, are they going to accept it? Or are they
Yeah.
not? Right? And that's a question that we all have to kind of ask ourselves.
Well, I think it's also like the discipline too, because there was lots of times when I was in Native studies where it was like, oh, I don't agree with something that one of my profs or one of their friends have published, and I'm going to take them on like head on and like try and dispute everything that they said in their book about like Métis identity. But it became like a challenge, and they widely like accepted me taking them on and being like, though, there's other ways to think about things. And usually they didn't get overly hurt about it or come down on me and like mark me like really crappy. Usually it was pretty good, but it just depends on what you're doing. And I feel like sometimes librarians are like sensitive about what they do and like our practices, and it's like, oh, you can't change, it's been this way. And then there's like so much resistance, things that are being published, like ways of changing like library practices, a bit of resistance to new librarians as well. And like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes,
And-
absolutely.
Yeah, or people with like different opinions as well. It's really strange. It's definitely weird transferring over from like Native studies and like the way that they do things to library land and the way that
Yeah.
library land functions.
Yeah, library land is all smiles, right?
Yes.
Depending on who you are.
Yeah, I find like library land is either like all smiles, we've drank all the Kool-Aid and
Oh,
loved
God.
the taste.
Yeah.
And
Until we realize it's poison.
Well, we're waiting for seconds on that Kool-Aid. That's how great it is.
Oh my
Or it's completely bitter and like critical. I'm like, where do I fit in on that spectrum?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
What else do you have to say about your publishing experiences? Because you
Oh,
have way more
jeez.
probably experience than like the two of us do.
Okay, well, I can talk about being a reviewer, too, because I was a reviewer for one journal.
Yeah, I peer reviewed once.
Sure.
I don't think they'll ever
Ah.
ask me to peer review ever again.
I hate peer review. I hate it so much. And that's the number one thing that I say in classes if I'm doing a library session, is that when you check that box off, you're eliminating so many different voices, right?
Mhm.
And as an Indigenous person, like, that's probably you too, or that's me. But when I was reviewing, and that's something that's really weird too, is that reviewers are evil. Can I just say that? People who are doing peer review are just so mean. They think that they're high up in their high horse or whatever, they have tenure or something like that. And it's just, The things that I've received back, because I've put it in for articles lots of times before. I don't know, it's just awful. They're like, this is stupid. Why are you even thinking that? I was like, well, you know what? Maybe it is stupid, but can you at least be nice about it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I reviewed once, and I tried to be as warm as possible and just be like, you know what? Your work is important, but it just needs to be fixed up to fit within this journal. What was your review experience like?
Oh, I think I was definitely, like, the mean person that was just,
like,
you're why
mean
are you
auntie?
even... Yeah, because, like, the paper was great, but if they would have removed, like, a section out of their paper, it would have been 100% better, because it was trying to blend two communities together, or two, like, ideologies together, and it just didn't work. And I think that's why it came to me, because it was, like, talking about the TRC and trying to, like, implement the recommendations, but the community was not an Indigenous community that the author was talking about. So it was talking about, like, the 94 calls to action and how they treat traditional knowledge, but it was not, like, an Indigenous community. Mm-hmm. So I was just kind of like, why are you doing this? Like, the one half of your paper is great, but, like, you know, we can't just take one thing that's Indigenous specific and try and put it on all communities. Mm-hmm. So I was just, like, a little bit mean and salty about it. And other times I'm like, yeah, it was great until this happened. It was just, like, me sitting at my computer in my, like,
smashing
little
your
cubicle.
Keyboard,
yeah.
Smash.
And I think I even, like, texted you and was like, I feel like I'm being really mean right now. Like, validate that I'm, like, right and not losing my mind over this paper, so.
But I think that really speaks to, like, how we get people with imposter syndrome. If we're just getting, like, mean reviews, and if that's how we think that we're supposed to create better knowledge or whatever, like, yeah. I don't know, but, like, I think there's something there of, like, what is wrong with this whole cycle, like, this chicken egg, like, cycle of, like,
violence, a cycle of violence.
Yeah, exactly. Mean reviews, imposter syndrome, and then mean reviews, imposter syndrome. I don't know, like, yeah. There's definitely something there. And yeah, it is completely violent. Like, with, like, my experience, like, obviously, if you don't understand how, like, this Indigenous perspective is not Canadian at all, I'm gonna click withdraw instead of try to fit it into a Canadian bubble. You're not ready for that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to waste my time on that.
Yeah, totally. What was it like working at, like, the press? So actually, like, within a publishing company.
How much do I say out loud?
I don't know.
Whatever you feel comfortable.
You know what?
Like, you do you.
I think my experience there was really problematic because of the internship that I was a part of.
Right.
Right? Because I was just coming into library school, and I got this internship. It's like, yay, that's awesome. I don't have to pay for school because I'm a broke ass. That's important. But when I got there, nobody asked me what I wanted to learn. Not a single person asked me what I was interested in, which is, I mean, it's okay. I'm just there to help them out and kind of fill out some gaps, maybe. Who knows? But I was put on metadata for about 9 months. Can I tell you how much I hate metadata? I'm so sorry, Sheila, but I hate it. Ugh.
I still don't understand it. And I'm like, I took a whole class on metadata, and I still am just like, no.
It's basically just data entry, and you're like, oh my god, I can't deal with this.
Yes.
I mean, that was torturous, and I told my supervisor at the time, I'm like, oh, I can't do this. Can I please switch out? I know that this is an excellent exercise in what I don't want to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So that was awful. I was really interested in editing, and I think the thing that I enjoyed the most was one of the acquisitions editors asked me if I could help them with their bibliography and their citations. And he basically said, here's the citations, can you find it? So it was a nice little scavenger hunt for me, which I actually really liked.
Nice.
And that got published in the book, which was awesome. Of course, I didn't get credit for it, but whatever. Yeah, other than that, I mean, I was brought in to work on a huge conference, and that was the Writing Stick Conference. And that was a very interesting experience, because right at that point in my life, I was really, like, kind of contemplating my identity and seeing, like, okay, who am I? What's going on? What does this have to do with the larger history of things? And it was actually, like, a really traumatic time. Probably those couple of years that I was in library school, because you don't realize how racist people are until you're stuck in a school or in a classroom where everyone is white. Every single person. And you're like, oh my God, I can't even. And of course, because I'm white passing, people say a lot of awful things. But working in the press, I definitely got a little bit of that too. Because I was almost expected to be the Indigenous expert, which at that time I wasn't. And that was a lot of responsibility for me to take on. I was lucky in that another Indigenous person kind of got brought into the project. If not for her, I probably would have just exploded.
I think it's also like problematic, this whole idea of like an Indigenous expert as well. Is there anybody out there that's actually like an expert in every single community like across Canada?
Nope. I'm an expert at making mistakes and putting my foot in my mouth. That's about it.
Like, I mean, I can definitely talk about my community and like communities that I've worked with, but even then, there's only so much about the communities I've worked with that I know. Like, I'll never be 100% of an insider within that community.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my own community, I could definitely talk about that, but I don't think we could ever be like an expert on every community. And if there is someone out there that's listening to this and they are an expert in every community, please contact us because we would like to interview you.
Tell us everything.
Yeah. If you are this mythical, like, expert, Indigenous expert,
I
definitely.
Think if that person exists, I think that person is exhausted because
of all the emotional labor they have to do.
They're probably like, go away, Kayla.
There's only been like a few projects going on at once where I've like been asked to be like the Indigenous person on the Indigenous project. And like, if I can only handle that like so many times, how could you possibly be that for everyone?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's exhausting. It's really exhausting being that Indigenous person because you're dealing with microaggressions and just bullshit all the time. When I was kind of going through it, I didn't even realize or recognize what was happening because, I don't know, there wasn't really anyone that I could talk to. I didn't know Kayla until a year after the internship. Do you know what I mean? So, I don't know. I think having an mentorship is really
we just
important.
Weren't, like, tight buddies.
We weren't buds. We were kind of feeling each other out, I think. Kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah, but there's other reasons for that.
Probably. Definitely. Yeah.
There is. We've talked about it before.
We won't get into it.
And it's also really like powerful to feel like really lonely in like these big industries, whether it's libraries, whether it's publishing, because you don't know how the system is set up.
Yeah.
You don't, and like even coming from Toronto, and I'm not actually from Toronto, I just moved here from Toronto. I only am from Toronto when I'm trying to be fancy.
Fancy Toronto.
But like even coming from there where it's like the most diverse city in the world, they're not very good at dealing with Indigenous anything.
Yeah.
Especially within their white library schools. And it wasn't as white as some of them, but definitely there's a dominant flavor and color.
Or it's like one of those things too, if there is like another person of color or like Indigenous person, it's like you're expected to be friends with each other, and like you're gonna have so many things in common and just be best buds. And like luckily like the three of us get along, but I've definitely been in meetings or something where another Indigenous person has been there and they're like, oh, well, you'll work great together. And it's like, well, how do you know that?
Yeah.
Like, just because we're both, like, Indigenous does not mean that we have to like each other and be, like, best friends forever and work on this project. Like, we're all different.
That I don't like.
Like, we're all different. And that doesn't also mean that we have the, like, same views and opinions. Like, when it comes to editing, Tanya and I have things that we definitely agree on, but there's some things that I'll definitely like challenge Tanya on, or she'll challenge me on, because we're not the same person. It's not like we all have like the same Indigenous brain and it's like shared.
Yeah.
Like, and we're born with it.
Yeah, we're all on a different spectrum too of knowledge, right? Because Kayla, you have way more community experience than I have, or probably will ever have. So when you say something, I value when you say it, right?
Yeah.
Because I know you know what you're talking about.
Most of the time.
Whereas,
I have my moments.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas my I don't know, expertise is more in like books and things, or I don't know. Yeah. Those types of things, working with academics and scholars, blah.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up, because that's why I don't understand. There's a lot of pressure with indigenizing everything right now. whatever that means, I will never know. Cluster hires is like seen as a solution for a lot of things in academia, especially. So hiring groups of people at a time, and then like hiring more groups of people, and then more groups of people. I don't understand how that will work just to make everyone get along. No, I don't know. And like expecting like people to be like your friends and also your colleagues and also your collaborators just because you happen to be Indigenous at the same time with the same employer is kind of weird and not really how it works. Yeah. For me, personally.
Yeah, I definitely heard an elder say, so I was at an event with the Faculty of Law a few days ago, and an elder that was there actually said that she didn't understand this like indigenizing everything, and especially because like the university and universities in general are a colonial institution, and she pretty much just said like you'll never be able to indigenize this place because it is a colonial institution. And then she went on to say like the most indigenizing that you're ever going to actually be able to accomplish is just hiring Indigenous people to work there. And that's about it. And I'm like, yeah, especially in some cases, there are places that do look at their like internal policies and practices, but really like we can't indigenize a place if they won't remove like problematic, like super colonial policies and practices from their actual institution. So if we're still working in a framework like that, but we're just hiring Indigenous people, we're not really like indigenizing or doing anything better.
Problematic policies and problematic people.
Yeah.
You know, that's
so
another
if publishing, libraries, those kind of places don't want to actually change their institution or like the way that they work, then they're not going to be able to like indigenize.
Yeah.
Just because we're working there doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, let's go back to that aspect of hiring, because that's something that we all kind of talked about. There's a lot of conversation around recruitment, but no one ever talks about retention. And that's my biggest bone, my biggest like frustration, whatever.
Yeah.
Because they're cluster hiring a bunch of people, but they're not actually having services or mentorship or anything to deal with the stuff that we've had to deal with.
Yeah.
And as an Indigenous hire, I'm often expected to do cultural training and all these other things, which is okay. Like, I actually don't mind doing that because I like teaching. That's something that I like to do. I don't know. I don't like teaching things that people tell me that I have to teach, you know, because we have the truth and reconciliation thing, and a lot of people still don't know the truth, but I'm beyond that, and I don't like reliving that truth over and over and over again, because then I'm presenting myself as a victim, and that does something to you mentally, you know?
Yeah. Well, for me, I'm just like, I'm at this point where I'm so like new into my career and I'm only on like a year-long contract. But it's one of those things where like the universities, they hire based on like merit. They go over this big list of things like that they want their new hires to have. And some of those things are like publishing. Everybody has this like, especially in academia, you have that like dream of tenure, or especially like we are faculty members as academic librarians at the U of A. So they want you to be publishing, but you look at contracts and you're like, well, where is this magical time that I'm going to have to be publishing, right? Like, I don't have time to sit down and write like a 15-page paper for an academic journal. I'm busy doing other stuff. I'm working with students. So how is my merit going to be measured if I don't actually have the time to be publishing and I'm trying to get my name out there? Or also, if I can't be publishing in like academic journals and I'm more looking at like open access journals, how is that going to be measured and compared to other people?
So people who are sitting behind their desk, not engaging with the community or with the students or anything, are actually getting further ahead. Whereas you are actually doing good community work, and you're not going to be able to just have anything to show for it, you know?
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm just like rare librarian that actually likes working with students and going to open houses and stuff like that, because I would rather do that than sit behind my computer and write a paper. Because that's I feel like that's more meaningful. I know like actually getting out there and like publishing is important, but I would rather like do a conference paper and then talk about it than just publish like in a journal.
And it seems like a lot of the way that publishing, especially in academia, is set up rewards that not having a work-life balance. I don't know what it's like for people who author other types of things, but I know like a lot of artists will be like tied very heavily to their work and like not have to do anything outside of their work, or like, you know, we have that image of like the writer who's just like drinking like either coffee or like alcohol.
Wine.
Yeah, and like writing constantly, and like a life of like lonely rejections, and like that doesn't seem very appealing to me either. So it's like we really do have a skewed work reward balance with publishing.
I don't know. I think one of the things that I really like doing is publishing, though, with other people, but you really have to be almost like choosy on who you publish with and be respectful of their time and also their interests. Just like I was saying before, like, just because we're Indigenous doesn't mean that we're all the same. And there's a lot of times that I've asked somebody and been like, hey, do you want to publish on this? But they're just not interested in it. So that's just like other labor and time that they don't have. But also the publishing world is like so weird and hard to negate that it's like you almost don't want to do it by yourself.
I almost feel like the publishing world and library land are the whitest places you could possibly be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I heard quite a few people say that, like other Indigenous folks are like, why are you over there? Why are you doing this? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm interested in books. I like them. But it's true. It's one of those things that we kind of all know without saying out loud. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you.
So I guess the question is like, can you indigenize it, or should we work with them? Or I don't even know what the question should be.
Well, I think like publishing is definitely something that's beneficial to Indigenous people, especially like we have such like a strong kind of cohort of newly emerging like Indigenous authors that are coming, and I love working with them and like reading their works, and they usually just give me all the feels, and especially if I know the person, like one of their books come out, I'm so proud, and of course I'm gonna buy it. But I think it's like a really great medium for some people to get their ideas and thoughts. I think it's more like just the way that we interact with Indigenous people that needs to change, because it's definitely like can't fall under this trope that like Indigenous people are only like oral people and like publishing is something that they're not into, because there are definitely like amazing writers that are Indigenous people, and we've seen that like there's so many big name authors out there and great emerging authors. I think the practice just needs to change so that it's more like transparent and more inclusive to Indigenous people, and then maybe more people will want to be publishing that aren't doing it now.
You're right about the community thing. Like, I'm just thinking about when Billy Ray got that award, and we were all just like swooning and so happy.
Oh yeah, especially
that's
when
like
he cried.
Yeah, because that's when someone gets an award like that, it's just a win for the whole Indigenous community.
Yeah,
and that's something that we need.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it is important for us to be able to tell our stories and to make it easier for the people that come after us to, if they want, to put the free labor into like getting their works published, to try to support that as much as we can, to have like a fully indigenized parallel publishing industry that's reliant not on them but only on us. I don't think it's something that we'll ever see. I hope we can get pretty close, and I hope we can get more and more people doing and like putting out really rad stuff that people need to hear and listen and see. But I don't know. Maybe that's just my jadedness coming out, but I don't know.
We're all just jaded and salty here.
Yeah, I don't know if it's possible.
And I think too, like, publishing is also a way of like talking about our pain and like our truth as Indigenous people, everything that's happened to us in the past. But it's a way of getting it out there to everybody, and it's a way of just spreading the word without actually standing up at like a podium and being like, this is my pain and my trauma. It's a way of almost releasing some of the past and talking about things.
I know that writing is it's really good for healing, but for me, I'm just worried about people getting off on that trauma.
Yes.
Like, there's no
Poverty
other
porn?
nice way to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, poverty porn, because like, it makes me feel gross inside when I see something like that, and people are like, oh, if you have one really great book that's really raw and emotional, and then you have a really powerful book, for example, how do I explain this? So I guess let's talk about Moonshot, the graphic novel, versus The Outside Circle. Obviously, The Outside Circle is way, way, way more popular right now, but it's because it's I don't know why, maybe it's because it's a
It's because
painful
it's more
story.
like, and it's more like educational.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, because I've had to read The Outside Circle for multiple classes on like gangs or like treatment centers, trauma, because that's what it's focused around.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost more like of an education, like it's used in educational context, whereas like Moonshot, it's more of like for me it's more like a pleasure reading. Like I don't see The Outside Circle as being like a pleasure reading for myself. Like it's more of something that I've had to use as a scholarly source.
But why can't Moonshot be a scholarly source, you know? Because for me, that just shows, like, Indigenous awesomeness all in a single volume,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it could be used as a scholarly source.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's what I'm going to, is why are we looking at traumatic stories versus resilient stories?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And I don't have an answer to that. I'm just throwing it out there.
It's that shock value thing. We like a traumatic shock value system and story because then it allows us to feel good about where we are. Like, oh, okay, well, that's not happening to me. Like, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, resilience, it's harder for us to accept that from anyone. It, like, puts us, like, oh, I'm not very resilient. It puts us in a more awkward situation to have to grapple with, how come I'm not as resilient as these people?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, it's easier to say, like, oh, okay, well, I'm not like that. Thank God.
We're all thinking now, like, oh my
we're all
gosh.
like, oh, huh.
And on that happy note.
Yeah, we're getting to be about time here. Yeah, let's end it off on this cliff note.
I don't know, maybe it's one of those things that in publishing we need to stop looking at publishing only narratives that are about trauma and thinking more about like the resiliency aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. More stories and more like examples of what is possible.
Yeah.
You know, like if we're only seeing one side of the truth, that's not truth.
Yeah, so hopefully we can explore some of these questions throughout the podcast. I know we have a couple of authors lined up that we're going to interview, so that's going to be really sweet. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Hi everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.